You're listening to Achtung Millwall, broadcasting from the beautiful South Bermondsey. Accept no substitute.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome, dear listeners. Welcome to a one-off edition of Achtung Millwall. My name is Nick Hart. You're listening to the number one Millwall podcast. You know you are. As you are well aware, dear listeners, we begin every show this season with our pundit.co.uk Pundit Games question. Number one Millwall podcast, number one football board game, quiz game. Wonderful game. Do get on it. Christmas is coming. And it makes a wonderful gift for the football head in your life. Now, before each edition this season, as you know, we ask a football question. This one is an England in the 90s question. Premier League in the 90s. 91, 92. This relates to a striker, an Arsenal striker, mainly well known for being at Arsenal. Played also for a variety of clubs, actually, before going to the Gunners. 1988 to 1995, an Arsenal striker, 228 appearances for the Gunners, 46 goals. So, you know, he was amongst the goal scorers. Previously he was loaned out to Leicester and Leyton Orient, don't remember that, but Nottingham Forest, vague recollection of him being at Forest. 1995 to 98, 80 games and 32 goals for Forest. Then on to Everton. Do remember him at Everton, actually. 137 games, 36 goals for the Toffees. Then West Brom and Cardiff. So this the question, a proper handful of a striker, started out at Arsenal before achieving cult hero status at Everton, where he remains the club's highest ever Premier League goal scorer. I didn't know that. So, 36 goals for Everton, 1999 to 2005. And previously, 1988 to 95 with Arsenal, 228 games, 46 goals. With one spell at Forest, 80 games for them, 32 goals. So decent striker, cult hero at Goodison Park. Do you know this striker, dear listeners? We'll read out the answer at the end of today's... it's a bit of a mixed bag of a show, actually. I had in mind to do a Hull City preview. Are you still basking in the afterglow of Wednesday night's fantastic win? Tuesday night's fantastic win, even down there at Plymouth? I am. It's certainly relieved a lot of tension around the Hart household. I don't know about your household, dear listeners. Good win in the end down there at Plymouth. After a tough first half, I thought we really took control with the wonderful goal by Zian Fleming, and then that late classic. It's become a Millwall classic goal now, isn't it? With the shoulder challenge, fair shoulder challenge by Zian Fleming to release the forgotten man, George Saville, who put the ball away with aplomb to make it 2-0 and create ecstasy amongst the 612 travelling Millwall fans. Just looking through the London news online, Millwall news, some good news. Millwall may be boosted by the return of Tom Bradshaw, the availability, I should say, of Tom Bradshaw for Saturday's visit of Hull City. Been out with a hamstring strain, suffered against West Brom. Gary Rowett says Bradders is really making good progress and there's a chance he may be available for the weekend. It would be great to see him back. He does work like a Trojan up front and we have missed that quality in recent games. We're certainly not ruling him out, says Gary Rowett. Let's hope he doesn't rush him back. I did have a sense that Kevin Nisbet was slightly pushed back early. He's not really been as electric as I thought we'd seen at the start of the season. Maybe we're not giving him the service, but certainly that was a good result down there at Plymouth on Tuesday night. Wes Harding, man of the match, named as man of the match on the Millwall Club website today. I agree with that. Everyone, the pundits on our show did in the aftermath of the win, all agreed. Wes Harding. Do you agree, dear listeners? I can't really see any other option. We did have some mentions in dispatches for Ryan Leonard and Casper De Noor and Duncan Watmore, actually, for his industry up front. But certainly Wes Harding, speaking to London News, says we need to start replicating our away form at the Den. Yes, we do. Yes, we do, Wes. That's the question. That's the $64,000 question. Can Gary Rowett muster that kind of away form, which is pretty good, pretty solid? We defended solidly at Plymouth. Can we reproduce that solidity matched with some form of attacking nous? Because that's really where this season particularly it's all gone a bit awry. That said, that win down there at Plymouth has left us 2 points off of the playoff spots. Only in the Championship do you get these kind of madcap sentences, but there we are, 14th in the table after that 2-0 win. 10 games into the season, we're approaching the quarter mark of the Championship season. That'll come up probably just after the international break. 10 games at the moment, 14 points for the Lions, a collection of clubs in front of us, but Leeds sit in 6th spot on 16 points, so just 2 points separating us. A good win against Hull City, who are 9th on 16 points, would really set the season ablaze. Amazing. The football's capacity to turn around so quickly is incredible. Obviously, there's a big if we can muster a win. Let's not talk about the performance at the moment. Let's what's the kids say? Shithouse. They shithouse a win versus Hull City first. But a return of Tom Bradshaw is certainly welcome news ahead of the visit of the Tigers. Now then, the reason that this is a mixed bag for you today, dear listeners, is I had is it a request? It's not really a request. It was a question posed to me by Matt Webb on Twitter, and I'm a bit of a sucker for these kinds of challenges. So Matt posted a picture of looks like a sports history book. Looks like it's the Times, Matt, if I'm reading the font and the logo in the corner of the page that you've sent me correctly. It looks like the Times Sporting History. So this one's from 1967. And it's got various headlines and stories of the time. So there's one here about the All Blacks cancelling a tour over the banned Maoris. This was a tour of South Africa, apartheid South Africa at that time. The All Blacks refusing to travel, I imagine, because one or two of their Maori players may have fallen foul of the racial laws applying in South Africa at that point. So they've cancelled their rugby union tour. This is July to December 1967 that we're picking these stories from. Tommy Simpson is a cyclist, Tour de France. Excess speed killed him in the Tour de France, it says here. This is climbing a mountain, Mount Ventoux. That's a classic name in the world of cycling. And there's a story of Bradford Northern in the Rugby League, folding 1964, resurrected, continued their recovery by staging 2 matches on a Sunday in this period. But anyway, the reason that I'm talking to you about the period of July to December 1967 is a very small paragraph in the the by the way section of it's laid out as though it's a newspaper, this particular image. I'll have to put the post on when I put the show out so you can have a look. But anyway, it mentions a second division match between Cardiff City and Millwall in November 1967 was abandoned after 31 minutes when a Millwall fan burst into the Cardiff offices to demand a refund and punched the Cardiff manager of the time, Jimmy Scoular, on the jaw. Now, Matt asked if I had any knowledge of this incident, which I hadn't heard of. One of the joys of doing these kinds of shows is you do learn something. You learn about incidents and storylines and, moments that players that you haven't come across before. So, no, Matt, I hadn't heard of that. I see he's copied in Neil, my partner in these kinds of shows, but he asked, can you shed some light on this game against Cardiff? Now, as I say, I hadn't heard of the story at all, but it's an abandoned match. The way it's worded here in the Times, abandoned after 31 minutes when a Millwall fan burst into the Cardiff offices to demand a refund, which finished up with him punching the Cardiff manager, Jimmy Scoular, on the jaw. Now, I have found the story, Matt, and there's a couple of errors, I would say, in the reportage that I've found, or differences, let's put it that way. because the way that's worded in the Times sportsbook, it sounds as though the game was abandoned because of this incident with the fan breaking into Cardiff manager Jimmy Scoular's office. However, I did find a report from the People and the Daily Mirror, actually. So the People, Sunday People, is dated the 5th of November, 1967. A very short couple of paragraphs, nothing much to it. Fan punches Scoular. Cardiff manager Jimmy Scoular was punched in the face by a Millwall fan after the game at Ninian Park had been abandoned on 31 minutes. The supporter, a 6-footer, 6 foot high, wearing a Millwall rosette, this is something from the past, dear listeners, rosette, forced his way into the passage leading to the dressing room, demanding his money back. He threw a punch before the Cardiff boss, regarded as a soccer tough guy when he played for Portsmouth and Newcastle, hustled him into his office. Millwall manager Benny Fenton and I had a few words with him, and then let him go, said Scoular. Benny Fenton, whose supporters were in trouble for attacking a referee last month, that was the infamous Norman Burton-Shaw incident, which we've touched on before. I won't go into that today, but this was only a month after the Burton-Shaw incident at the Den. Said to the people, he was the sort of hothead that we don't want at Millwall. So the game's been abandoned, and then the fan has somehow forced his way into the passage, the dressing room passageway, and then assaulted Jimmy Scoular. There's another report here dated November the 6th. This is the Monday report. This is a thing from the past that younger listeners won't appreciate. We live in the age of instant information now, don't we? Back then, you looked out hoping for a short paragraph or two, if you got lucky, in the Sunday papers. Obviously, games are always played on a Saturday. And then hopefully you got a report on the Sunday. And then usually, if you were really lucky, you got a follow-up report on the Monday. And lo and behold, there is a Monday paper report. This is from the Daily Mirror. November the 6th, 1967. Summer of Love had happened. Not at Millwall. No Summer of Love down in Bermondsey, down along Coldblow Lane, dear listeners. All that hippie business. No, thank you. Anyway, the headline of a slightly longer story here. Punched Scoular will take no action. But this is a story by Tom Lyons of the Daily Mirror. Cardiff City manager Jimmy Scoular, who was punched in the face by an angry Millwall supporter on Saturday, will not take the matter any further, he says. Scoular flew out to Holland yesterday to watch NAC Breda, Cardiff's opponents in the second round of the European Cup Winners' Cup, playing Sparta Rotterdam. Cardiff were regular qualifiers for the European Cup Winners' Cup, a competition that's no longer with us, sadly. I used to like the Cup Winners' Cup. Because they always won, invariably, the Welsh Cup, and that was a qualifying tournament to play in the European Cup Winners' Cup. So they were regular, took part in Europe. It was unusual back then. So here he's gone out to size up their opponents, NAC Breda. The story continues. The Scoular abandoned, it says. Scoular was attacked after Cardiff's game with Millwall had been abandoned in pouring rain in the 30th minute with the pitch waterlogged. A young man, no indication as to his height, but a young man wearing a Millwall scarf and rosette pushed his way past the gatekeeper, at Ninian Park, and demanded his money back. When Scoular tried to reason with him, the man lashed out and hit the Cardiff chief under his left eye, so not his jaw. With commendable restraint, manager Scoular hustled his assailant into his office and warned him to behave, or he would hand him over to the police. After a severe dressing down from Scoular and Millwall manager Benny Fenton, the man was escorted out of the ground. I'd say he's got away quite lightly there, dear listeners. And I also want to take my hat off to Jimmy Scoular there, who says he's going to take no further action. The bloke's just been slung out. And I think that's old school behaviour. Don't you agree? You know, the punch has been thrown. And nowadays you probably have a legal action or something out of it. As back then, he's took it on the eye, not on the chin, as the Times original story had it. and handled it with restraint, as the Daily Mirror says. So a number of things to say there. The game was abandoned not because of this incident, which was the impression that I got when I first saw Matt's boys' page. It was a waterlogged pitch, downpour of rain, which is, unfortunate, but I don't think anyone would have, it's not anyone's fault. The pitch waterlogged. Referees called it off, and this chap wearing a scarf and rosettes. This is something you don't see. You don't see scarves too often, let alone a rosette. That's something that's really passed out of the game, which would have made an incongruous figure, wouldn't it? 6 foot tall, according to the other report, wearing a scarf and a rosette. There's something slightly fey about rosette. I'm saying this to you because that was one of the first souvenirs that I ever bought when I started going Millwall. The club shop used to be on Coldblow Lane. It was barely... we complain about the club shop now, listeners, but blimey, back then it was a wooden hut shed, effectively, that you could never get into because it was always crammed with people selling the tattiest stuff. And in my youth, I was about 12 when I started going. 11 when I started going. What I'm talking about? I was about 12 when I bought this rosette because I felt like I wanted to identify now with this club that I discovered largely. I didn't really know much about Millwall until I started going in 72. And so, as you do when you're a kid, you want to identify and connect with your club. So I bought myself a rosette from the club shop. It was all white because we played in all white in those days. And it had the tackiest FA Cup in kind of silver foil in the middle of this white arrangement of, I suppose it's meant to be ribbon, probably just some kind of polyester stuff produced in a factory somewhere to a general order, and then stapled to the rosette in the middle was a printed Millwall, just like block capitals on a bit of cardboard stapled in. I was proud of it until I noticed that not many others wore rosettes to the game. I took it home and I kept it for many years. Don't know what happened to it. Got lost in the 1,000,001 tumults of life ever since. But so that was my first ever purchase as a fan. And your man here busted into Jimmy Scoular's office wearing a scarf and a rosette. This is the detail that really adds colour to this particular story. I do admire Jimmy Scoular for just giving the bloke a piece of his mind in his office with Benny Fenton, also another, old school figure. And then he was slung out, really, There used to be rules on getting your money back. I have an idea that there used to be a condition of entry that you didn't get your money back once play had started or something of that order. I can't remember how they used to word it now. Obviously in sports like cricket and I was watching the Speedway the other night. You have to have a certain number of races to constitute a match. I know that you have to have a certain number of overs in cricket for it to be, both sides have had a bat, and then it's deemed a game, subject to the various Duckworth-Lewis, shenanigans that you can get. Watching the Speedway, I had to have 10 races in the pouring rain the other night for it to constitute a game, and then I presume you don't get your money back if it gets called off. I can't remember what football's rules are on it. Anyway, that's a different subject. So there we are. There is the story, Matt. It is a story. Fan punches Scoular, Jimmy Scoular, the Cardiff manager, in the aftermath of an abandoned game. I suppose he was well browned off with having gone down to Cardiff only to see it pour down with rain, and then the game gets called off. It would be rearranged about a month later, a midweek game, which again would be a bit of a bastard, wouldn't it? Because you're not going to get down to a midweek game with work like you could do for a Saturday game. But I do have a report from the rearranged fixture, which took place in the 5th of December, 1967. This would be a team comprising of Brian King in goal, John Gilchrist, Dennis Burnett, Brian Jacks, Barry Kitchener, Ken Jones, Derek Posse, Keith Weller, Brian Conlon, Eamon Dunphy and Billy Neal. Conlon will be replaced by a player that I've picked out for you. So I hadn't come across him before. you know, I've heard the name of Brian Conlon, and I've picked him out too, but didn't know much about Conlon. This is all predates me starting to go to Millwall, but I certainly hadn't heard of Ron Howell, who came in for Conlon. So I do have a match report for the rearranged fixture for you, dear listeners. We like to give you value for money. I mean, you know, subscription fees are very, very high on this channel, so you know we do like to deliver as much as we possibly can for you. So the original game in November was abandoned, rearranged for the 5th of December. Bustling Brown saves Cardiff, says Tom Lyons, reporter with the Daily Mirror. Cardiff 2, Millwall 2, it finishes. Inside right, Bobby Brown, former England amateur international. Amateur international, you don't get that definition anymore, do you? Saved Cardiff with only 2 minutes to go. This after Keith Weller had put Millwall in front of a second goal 5 minutes from full time. Brown burst through with 2 minutes to go to snatch an equaliser. Cardiff led from the 39th minute when John Toshak will go on to fame with Liverpool later on in his career, and then manage in Swansea, I think, and Spain. Did he not go to, was it Bilbao that he went to? Toshak? Anyway, Toshak side-footed home across from centre forward Peter King to put them 1-0 up. Mill centre forward Brian Conlon, who have picked out, hurt his knee in a collision with the Cardiff goalkeeper Bob Wilson. Go on to fame and fortune with Arsenal, of course, and then would present match of the day, I think, in due course in the 80s. Collision took place in the 30th minute, and Conlon had to go off for treatment. He returned 6 minutes later limping. This was the era of just one substitute. Conlon stayed on to see Mill equalise a minute after the interval through Weller, but in the 52nd minute he went off and Ron Howell came in. Conlon had barely reached the dressing room when Mill suffered another injury, this time to goalkeeper Brian King, who was hurt in stopping a drive from John Toshak. The game was held up several minutes whilst he received treatment. Cardiff brought off left winger Ron Bird after 77 minutes and replaced him with Gary Bell. But in the 85th minute, Keith Weller put Millwall ahead by blasting home a pass from Eamon Dunphy. And then came Brown's late dramatic equaliser. It finished Cardiff 2, Millwall 2. I'm sure, I remember when I spoke to Brian King, I did an interview with him during the lockdown, and I'm sure he mentioned the injury sustained at Cardiff. It certainly put him out of contention for some while afterwards. This was the 1967-68 season, and King had just not long forced his way into the team, in truth. Laurie Leslie, Scottish international goalkeeper, I think, Laurie Leslie, in his time, took over in the games. We began the season. King then came in as the new hot goalkeeping prospect, having signed from Chelmsford. And then Leslie was forced back into the side for a couple of months, up until March of 68, when Brian King was able to return. 67-68, Mill would finish in 7th position in Division 2, as it was then. We would be 45 points, top 2 promoted back in those far-off days. Ipswich and QPR promoted, 1st and 2nd position, so we were some way off of promotion, but relegated from the division that season, Plymouth and Rotherham. Top scorer for Millwall, 67-68, was Keith Weller, 14 goals, followed by Derek Posse on 12 goals, and Brian Conlon, we just mentioned, on 10 goals. So Conlon's not a name that often gets mentioned, so I thought it might be nice to pick out Brian Conlon and Ronald Roger Howell. Begin with Ron Howell. He was a midfielder, played just 15 games for us between 1966 and 1970, scoring just 1 goal in that time. He was born in Tottenham in 1949. His career took in various clubs, really. Millwall, 1967 to 70, as we've said. Cambridge United, Kettering, Swindon, Brighton, 1973, Tooting and Mitcham, Leytonstone, Dagenham, various Mount Grace. Manager of Leighton Pennant, there's a name from the past, non-league name. and then assistant manager at Finchley in 1986. He made his debut in the 24th of March 1967 in a 2-0 win over Bury. The biog, this is from Neil's book, the A to Z, who's who of Mill players. Ronnie Howe was one of a clutch of Mill players that Mill poached from the Tottenham area of North London in the mid-60s. An excellent youth player and reserve team performer, Ron found it hard to maintain consistency when he reached the first team. Skillful and articulate, he was aided by some slick passing. He left the lines to move to Cambridge in 1970 for their inaugural Football League campaign. They'd been voted in. I do remember them being voted in. It was quite something for clubs to come into the league back then. So he left for Cambridge in 1970. His league career was ended after a clash of personalities with Brighton manager Brian Clough. Ronnie still lives in his native North London and worked as a rank messenger in the City of London. Ron Howe, still going. Good luck to him. The other name I wanted to pick out was Brian Conlon, a centre forward. Predates my time, so I'm going very much from, I have no knowledge of Brian Conlon, let me put it that way too. He was a centre forward with the Lions from 1967 to 69, played 45 games, scoring 13 times for us. Born in Shildon in the northeast in 1943. Sadly passed away in Shildon in 2000. His career took in various northeastern sides, Durham County, trial at Sheffield Wednesday, Newcastle, South Shields, Darlington, before coming to Millwall for 15,000 in November 1967. He would leave us in the December of 68, go to Norwich, Blackburn Crew, and Cambridge as per Ronnie Howes. The biography describes Brian as strong and forceful, a target man. Brian Condon came to Mill's attention when he scored for Darlington when they knocked the Lions out of the League Cup in 1967, October. The wheels were set in motion virtually straight after the game, and within 3 weeks, Brian had signed on the dotted line. He made a dream start in a Millwall shirt, scoring against Crystal Palace. That was his debut versus Crystal Palace, a 2-2 draw, November 67. But after a little over a year, he was transferred to Norwich. Brian returned to live in Shildon in County Durham, working as a milkman, and coached his local work side. He sadly died after a long illness in 2000, aged 57. So rest in peace, Brian Conlon. So there we are. That was the rearranged fixture from the abandoned match, in the aftermath of which we have this incident with Jimmy Scoular, Cardiff manager. Now, it's unusual for me on these shows, listen, I wanted to focus on Jimmy Scoular because I was quite impressed by the reportage of the way he handled that incident. You can picture it being a very different situation nowadays, and I wanted to look at I didn't know the name Jimmy Scoular, so I found that his obituary, it's online, it's in the Independent, and he died in 1998, and I was really struck reading it. He has no Mill connection other than this particular story of, the disgruntled fan, hot-headed, as Benny Fenton described him, and then throwing a punch, but the Scoular being man enough to deal with it in a very correct way, if you like. And when you hear his obituary, you kind of get a sense as to why he would have handled it so. Also, a bit of a picture as to how the game has faded far from a working class life that's now very much in the distance. I suppose it's one of these stories where you feel, I suppose I've lived long enough now to still feel connected to it. My grandparents would be of this generation, and there was a certain life experience that just made it a very different world. Anyway, I'm waffling. So this is Jimmy Scoular's obituary. Jimmy Scoular was a footballing volcano, and certainly not of the dormant variety. A fearsome, combative Scot from a flinty mining upbringing, he tackled like a runaway coal wagon and was prone to explosive eruptions of fury, yet he possessed precise passing skills which could change the course of a game. It was said of him that he played sometimes as if he hated everyone on the field. I like that line. Demolishing opponents, bawling out teammates and confronting referees. but it wasn't true. Jimmy was a decent man with a tremendous sense of humour, and there was no hate in him. It was just that he was obsessed with the game, and more particularly the winning of it. There are those who reckon that barring his abrasive temperament, the small but enormously muscular right half would have won many more honours. But a counter-argument is that without that irrepressible fire, he would have been but a pale shadow of Scoular the Scourge. As it was, he didn't do badly. He picked up 2 league championship medals with Portsmouth, leading Newcastle United to FA Cup glory and earning 9 international caps for his country. Most importantly, he was an utterly honest, truly formidable as a foe, but unshakable as a friend. It had always seemed likely that Scoular would follow his father Alec, who played for Alloa Athletic, Stenhouse Muir and Leith Athletic, before the Second World War into the professional game. However, the conflict diverted his energies, and it was during the conflict that he saw service as a submarine engineer on HMS Dolphin at Gosport in Hampshire. There he was spotted in Royal Naval football by Portsmouth, who were then a major soccer power. He signed in 1945 and lost little time in winning the regular berth in the Fratton Park side, forming a vividly contrasting wing-half partnership with the placid, gentlemanly Englishman Jimmy Dickinson. Together, the two men provided a solid midfield platform on which was built Pompey's successive title triumphs of 1949-1950, league champions. An immense achievement in the face of stern opposition from the likes of Sir Matt Busby back then, Manchester United, and Stan Cullis' Wolves. However, despite his inspirational play, Scoular frequently fell foul of the authorities, and his absence through suspension from the last 2 games of 1949-50, following a sending off, which was an uncommon event in that era, provoked controversy and personal criticism. Come 1952-53, with the side struggling, Scoular was dropped briefly and asked to leave, though he was restored almost at once when he did this. But he was granted his wish in the summer, and while the ostensible reason for his £22,000 move to Newcastle was that transfer request, the feeling persisted that his lurid image did not suit Pompey's management. The South Coast loss proved the North Easterners' gain, as Scoular was installed as Magpie skipper, driving his colleagues relentlessly and setting a rousing personal example. Though league form was disappointing for a club with such lofty aspirations, there was compensation in the FA Cup final defeat of Manchester City in 1955. That day at Wembley saw Scoular his most irresistible, neutralising the much-vaunted threat of the deep-lying centre-forward Don Revie through his ruthless marking and providing the springboard for victory with a stream of raking crossfield passes to his left winger Bobby Mitchell. Man of the Match awards were not in vogue at the time, but had there been one, it must have gone to the Geordies' Motivator Supreme. City fans had barracked him, but he had claimed such treatment merely spurred him on to greater efforts. As for the Newcastle followers, they had bored him as a dirty so-and-so during his Portsmouth days, but now they described him as robust but fair, which might have been a tad euphemistic, but nevertheless was pretty much the truth. Thereafter, Scoular remained a cornerstone of United's team for the rest of the decade, not departing until he was 36 in 1961, when he joined 4th Division Bradford Park Avenue as a player-manager for a nominal sum. After one season of apparent consolidation, they returned to the basement Division 4 in 1963. He continued to play listeners into his 40th year, laying aside his boots in February 1964, 3 months before his Yorkshire sojourn terminated with a sack. In June, he was appointed boss of 2nd Division Cardiff City, which brings us to our incident with your man bursting into his office. Frequent winners of, as we've said, they were frequent winners of the Welsh Cup, so they took part in European football. The highlight being 1967-68, where they reached the semi-finals of the European Cup Winners' Cup, losing on aggregate to Hamburg 4-3. They fell away dramatically over subsequent terms, culminating Jimmy Scoular's dismissal in 1973. After that, he scouted for Villa, Wolves, and then managed Newport County for a year, then scouting for Swansea and Newcastle. Outside of the game, he worked as a representative for a chemical firm and ran a guest house in Cardiff before retiring to live near the city. In his final years, Jimmy Scoular was severely incapacitated by illness, a poignant end to a vibrantly active life. He lived from 1925 and passed away in 1998, leaving 3 daughters and a wife. Now, it's very unusual for us to cover a non-Millwall figure, but I make no apologies for that. Jimmy Scoular sounds like one of the old school, proper footballing characters, carved out of rock. And his name cropped up in the course of this particular edition. I was intrigued to find out more about him, and I'm glad that I did. That was his obituary in full. There we are. R.I.P. Jimmy Scoular. Huge thank you to Matt for sending me this, Matt Webb, for sending me this particular story. I hadn't come across the incident with a fan bursting into Jimmy Scoular's office before. I thought it deserved a show in its own right, so here we are. And the way that Scoular managed that situation, having just read his obituary, having heard about him as a man, fits in. And I think that's quite a nice tribute. So there we are. Huge thank you to Matt Webb for that storyline. Now that's the end of the show, impromptu show. I've got to answer the question. When the question that we started today's edition with was pundit.co.uk question number 1 football quiz game, dear listeners. This was a proper handful of a striker starting at Arsenal before achieving cult hero status at Everton through the 1990s, early 2000s. He remains Everton's highest ever Premier League goal scorer, so 228 appearances for Arsenal, 80 for Nottingham Forest, and 137 appearances for Everton, 36 goals. It was Kevin Campbell, great striker, Kevin Campbell. I hope you've enjoyed this little impromptu edition of Achtung, Millwall, dear listeners. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back after the Hull City game on Saturday. Let's keep our fingers crossed for a win. And big shout out to Neil Harris, who apparently has just been sacked by Gillingham. There's a story. Let's see how that develops. Arrivederci Millwall. Thank you for listening, dear listeners. Thank you, Matt, as well. Speak to you all soon. Bye for now.